Captain's Log Supplemental.
Hey Jeremy, you know those race cars you're busy building?
Yeah, I do.
You,
I
you,
got one
you
that I'm looking at every day.
you know what I don't see you working on?
You don't see me working on the amazing Sentinel system yet.
That's true. It would take all of 10 minutes for you to have one.
And it's very quick and easy to install.
It is. It is. And we could watch you when we are not at the race with you and see how you're doing. And then we can call you up when you get out of the car and tell you everything you did wrong.
And I love that because so many years I've been driving and not been able to see what I'm doing.
I know.
And now we can.
I know. You know what I'd like to do with the video? My most favorite thing is I take the video and I load it on YouTube and then I send it to my coach and say, look at 26 minutes and 17 seconds. Look at this one lap and tell me what I can do better. And every single time, you know what they say?
Everything.
Exactly. Precisely. So with the Sentinel system, you get instantaneous feedback plus useful feedback that unfortunately is accurate for my driving.
I think it's accurate for all of our driving.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's probably true. Yep. But you need to get one in your car, sir.
Yes, I do. And with the discount code that you're going to tell everybody, they can save 10% on this awesome system.
Yep. Trouble free. I haven't had an issue getting video every time we've gone out with the Sentinel. It's always worked. Can't say the same for some of the other systems we've tried. So I don't know. It's on the podcast notes down there. Don't do it while you're driving though. We like to have our listeners live. It's good.
Who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision, Bill Fisher, and their soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicki Fisher, and our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Scripchuk. Their mission: to fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Welcome to the Garage Heroes in Training podcast. I am the only host. You're stuck with me this week. It's Bill. And we have a guest this week, a returning guest. And he is one that we've had on the list for lap 2 and lap 3 and lap 50. However, he is a very exceedingly busy, involved with racing, involved with his company called Grass Paddock Motorsports. He's been racing B-Spec and a racer for quite a while, so he knows the pain and feels the pain of racing on the grass roots motorsport type racing. And welcome back to the podcast, Frank Schwartz.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Always good. And you were requested to come back, and I've been delinquent in contacting you about it. And then I did, and you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but not just yet, because you've been having too much fun recently. What have you been up to?
Well, in general, we're on the road 30 weekends a year at a racetrack somewhere. Um, we have cars located around the country
Hmm.
uh, for a strategic reason we'll get into a little bit later. But, you know, it's pretty much every other weekend we're somewhere. And even though we live in the Midwest, where our race season runs from basically April through October, uh, racing all around the country means we only have a couple of weeks off in December, basically. Other than that, we're going somewhere all the time.
That's fantastic. Watkins Glen was on the recent hit list, right?
Yeah, so exciting. It's my favorite track. I've done about 35 tracks around the country right now, and you know, between driving it and racing on it, which are not the same thing.
They are not.
Some tracks drive really fun, but they're not really fun to race on because it's passing is a little difficult, a little iffy in some areas. And then you're not on track the whole weekend, so having a location where there's a lot of fun things to do outside of the racetrack Watkins Glen is a kind of little resort weekend community, so there's a lot of people visiting, doing touristy things, but it also means there's a lot of great restaurants and things to do, state park to go hiking in, and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's my favorite track in the country so far.
Well, the next one's always my favorite. So that's I stole that from Russ Bentley, but it seems appropriate to just about every racer. So have you been to the world famous bar slash restaurant near Watkins Glen?
Well, there's quite a few of them. Obviously, there's the Seneca Lodge.
That's the one I think.
Yeah. But we did a brewery restaurant about 10 miles out of town on Saturday night called Grist, thanks to a recommendation from a friend of mine, Jason, and a phenomenal view over the lake, and the food was really good, and the atmosphere was top notch. So yeah, had a great time. I had a couple of clients who were renting cars, and we were taking care of cars this weekend in addition to driving ourselves. And they asked me at the end of the weekend, how was your weekend? What was your favorite part? And even though I managed to win both my races on Saturday and Sunday, my favorite part was when we all went out to dinner on Saturday night.
Yeah,
So, I've said it before. If I told you racing was free, but you couldn't take any friends to the track and you couldn't make any friends while you were there, you just had to kind of do it by yourself. People would probably race two or three times, but it'd get old pretty quick. The people are what make it all worthwhile for me.
indeed. It's the two complement each other very well, but either one independently, maybe the friends would win out in the long run, but it would definitely dramatically and drastically cut the enjoyment out of racing because most of the people at the racetrack are the best people. So,
Well, it helps that you have something in common to begin with.
hmm
But, in general, a race weekend for the overwhelming majority of people is a vacation.
yeah,
And people, short of having an accident or mechanical problems with the car, people are generally in a really good mood at a racetrack. Even though you may be up late working on the car and have to get up early to get ready for everything and you don't get enough sleep and you're like super busy and it's physically exerting and you've got to unpack everything and pack everything back up. Um, by and large, there's a lot of smiles at a racetrack.
yeah, yeah. But even the bad times make for great stories once you're done.
Yeah, sometimes you need a couple of weeks to let it kind of work its way through the system.
Yeah,
Um, we,
I don't
we,
want to count how many times I've been at the racetrack saying, "Is this juice worth the squeeze?"
yeah.
Sometimes it just piles, but that's okay. So Frank, you address one of the things with your company that early on we made fun of our friend Adam because he wouldn't get his own car, and he is a devoted renter of race cars, and we made fun of him because that's the way you have friends is you make fun of them. Um, but as we got more into this was like first or second year we were racing. As we've gotten more and more into it, we noticed that maybe Adam had some wisdom that we weren't acknowledging at the time. But where he just doesn't want to own a race car, maintain a race car, work on a race car, but he loves driving. And your company kind of addresses that directly by, assisting people like that and maybe some other people who should be like that.
Yeah, so I think it's probably important to kind of describe a little bit about what I do during my day job. So I've been a consultant in the automotive industry for about 15 years. I work for automotive suppliers and I work directly for some car companies, um, helping them understand how to do business better. So I'm sort of on the corporate strategic side of things. And as such, I did 30 some years in the industry. getting up to a pretty high level executive vice president at one of the suppliers. And research and data was like a super important part to making decisions. I mean, you got a lot of people who work for you who are smarter than you in very specific areas, so you take their feedback. But a lot of times there's a lot of emotion involved in things, and you kind of need to have some non-emotional data. So it's one of the things I did for quite some time on the automotive side is market research and it's important how you design a survey and a questionnaire and what kind of questions you ask people because you can lead them into the answers that you want them to have and you can disguise things that are important and maybe don't come out.
Hmm.
So quite some number of years ago, when I was racing in a class that wasn't doing very well from a participation point of view. And I said, this is probably time to take my day job and my weekend job and combine them. And, so much for everybody who has an opinion about why racing is successful or who isn't. I'm going to do the research and I'm going to do some studying about why people race and why they don't race and what causes them to start and what causes them to quit and what kind of different people race and how all of that can be used to make the experience better for everybody.
Right.
So one of the things that certainly came out through all of that is we all race for different reasons, but in general, A, racing isn't cheap, and B, we're all really busy. So
Hmm.
there's limitations to how much you can race, even if racing is the most important thing to you in the world, right? Unless you're independently wealthy, retired, and have a lot of free time, which, by the way, there are quite a few of those people racing. Um, but for the majority of us, the rest of us, um, having 3 weekends a year available to go racing is pretty much the limit. The majority of people who race 2 or 3 weekends a year. And this kind of comes back to the question about owning versus renting. From a financial point of view, if you're not doing 4 weekends a year, you can't economically justify owning a race car. In other words, the cost of a tow vehicle, the cost of a trailer, the extra time that you have to take. When it's your own car, you got to get to the track a few hours early and you leave a few hours later because it takes time to unload and pack up and all of those kind of things. So over the course of a year, 4 weekends is kind of the break even. Yet the majority of people only can race 2 or 3 weekends. So clearly, I'm not going against the idea that emotionally, there's always a reason to own your own race car,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think you're being very charitable in saying break evens for because
Yeah,
you're at the minimum. you know?
yeah, and that's because most people underestimate the value of their free time,
Hmm.
right? So, I'm just saying, my free time is worth 15, $20 an hour, which, for some people it's more than they make at their job, and for other people it's substantially less. But, even at that rate, it's pretty involved. So,
Hmm.
um, one of the things I did after I used all of this data to help grow the class I was part of, um, when I stopped doing that, it was kind of like running on its own. Then I started a business to have race cars for rent, and the general idea in the beginning was Spec Miata is kind of like entry level, but you know it's not exactly inexpensive, and I think the B spec class has an opportunity to be less expensive than Spec Miata when you compare nationally competitive cars, right?
Right.
Because you almost can't rent a nationally competitive Spec Miata. You can rent a regionally competitive one all day long.
Yeah. Yeah.
nationally competitive cars are, hard to come by. In B spec, you can literally rent a car and win the runoffs with it if you're talented enough as a driver, because there's several companies around the country in addition to mine that have cars for rent. And secondly, the way the rules are set up, the cars are actually more evenly matched than even Spec Miata,
Yeah.
which is something people don't fully understand. If you take a field of Spec Miata cars and you take the person who's in the middle of the pack and compare them to the fastest car, the gap is bigger than if you do the same thing in a B spec race. And by the same token, it works the same way, you know, top third of the field, top 10 of the field. It's different top five because B spec just doesn't have the size to have, top notch, five top notch drivers show up at the same track. But um, certainly, if you look at Spec Miata and SRF3 as the two classes that everybody says are even, they're actually less even than B spec. So, again, the idea that you can rent a car inexpensively, and if you don't win the race, it's not the car, it's you. That's rare, no matter what class of racing you run in, but it's possible in B spec.
Right. Yep. Yeah, we were in and out of B spec for a little bit just because we couldn't get enough weekends of racing everything together. So we gave it to somebody who's a friend of ours to get it being used because it just sat there with us and we just never got there.
Well, this is the biggest issue, not to go off on a tangent, but this is probably the biggest issue um, looking at racing across the country. The general idea that you want to race because you want to drive fast on a racetrack can be accomplished with a HPDE or a time trial or some other kind of competition event. You don't necessarily need a race car to do it. If if you're doing racing, you want other people who have similar rules, wheel-to-wheel competition. You want to have some sort of battle. But depending on the class that you're in and the part of the country you're in, you can't really always guarantee that you're going to find other people to be competitive with.
Mm-hmm.
Some classes that are very strong in certain regions, and Formula B, big in the Northeast, almost non-existent on the West Coast,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So, um, people have to do research on that, and a lot of people don't, and then buy a car and then are disappointed in my area. I either can't race it enough because there aren't enough races, or um, I race all by myself most of the time. And so that's something to consider as you go through it. Again, it comes back to another advantage for renting. You're never stuck with a car when you rent, because at the end of the weekend you give it back and you're done, and you're still very free and flexible.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And, there's a certain advantage of, finishing the weekend and just walking away to a regular car and getting in it as opposed to getting the car into the trailer, getting the trailer into a truck, then trailering all the way home. It's a significant delta in time.
Yeah, and uh, finances are probably one of the reasons why people are limited in how many times a weekend they can race.
Mm-hmm.
How much free time they have is a critical aspect of it. How far they are from the racetrack is a critical aspect. Again, I do a lot of research in other sanctioning bodies and stuff like that, but the cutoff seems to be 5 hours. If there's a racetrack within 5 hours of where I live, there's a very high likelihood I'm going to go. Uh, Once you go past 5 hours, the numbers drop pretty substantially. And I think the reason is most people can find a way. If you're already at a point where you can afford to go racing, you're probably at a point with your job where you can find a way to leave work Friday early to go racing, right?
Yeah.
You're not You're not working 40 hours a week in fast food where, they're not letting you get out of your schedule. That's typically not going to earn enough money to go racing. That's, again, racing isn't cheap.
No.
My data shows it's not getting more expensive, but it was never cheap. And you have those arguments online all the time with people about it's too expensive, I can't afford it. And I'm like, well, when I started back in the 80s, I had to have a second job to pay for racing.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it on my salary. So if you have some impression that back in the old days, you know, we got to go racing for, you know, $150 entry fee, you're correct. At that time, I was making $7 an hour,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So that $150 entry fee was a pretty substantial hit,
And that's only the start.
probably more expensive compared to my salary than a $500 entry fee is today.
Sure. And it varies across the country because I know I get jealous of our friends on the West Coast. Their HPDEs seem to be a whole lot cheaper than the East Coast guys, but I'm not going to tow to LA to go racing, so it is what it is.
According to my data, and if we're talking about sprint racing, because I'll talk about endurance racing a little later. According to my data, if you are sprint racing, the cheapest, least expensive place to race in the country is in Detroit at Waterford Hills.
Mm,
Waterford Hills is a private club. I say private, anybody can join, right?
right.
So, and that owns their own racetrack. They race 6 weekends a year. They race 3 races a weekend. And for club members, which means that you volunteered some time to help do maintenance at the track somewhere during the course of the year, uh, you can race all 6 weekends for less than $275 a weekend
Wow.
as an entry fee. And then if you consider that Detroit is a major metro area, the overwhelming majority of people who race there live here, which means there's literally no travel expenses. There's no hotel expenses. You can eat dinner at home.
Right.
I raced there early in my career when my children were young. I was able to race on a Saturday and get home in time to give my kids a bath before they went to bed and read them a bedtime story. Right? So, um, you know, it's one of the key reasons when people call me and ask me, "Hey, I want to start racing. What can you advise me?" My first question is, "What's your zip code?"
Yeah.
Because if you live in certain zip codes, it's ridiculously expensive. And if you live in other zip codes, it's really easy and inexpensive.
Yeah, I don't think we're at the extreme where we're at, but I think we're towards the higher end. Just East Coast, Northeast especially is a little pricey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we were making fun of Adam, and Adam probably can laugh at us now, we were saying, you should get a car because the one thing racers are good at is we want to share the sickness with as many people as we can, and it even to the point of the first one's free, but then we set the hook and life is good from there on. But I think he had some wisdom because he's not really. It's not that he's not mechanically inclined; he's not interested in being the mechanic. So I think it works well for him.
Well, to be fair, if you want to turn my stomach, you put a wrench in my hand. I'm in a bad mood before I even put the wrench on a nut or a bolt.
Hmm.
I really dislike working on cars, but I'm not wealthy, so I have to work on cars in order to own cars. And the business, it's not just that we have people today who are less mechanically inclined because cars are more complicated. So
Yep.
for every person who's less capable of turning a wrench, they're probably more capable of decoding software related problems in cars. So, you know,
Sometimes
I'm
they're
not,
the same thing because the software is becoming harder and harder in cars. It's killing
yeah,
me.
yeah. So, so I'm not going to be one of those people who jump on the bandwagon that say, hey, we don't have a lot of racers today because they're not mechanically inclined. You know, growing up when I did, you had to be mechanically inclined to own a car because you were broke, you had a used car, and it would break down all the time. And if you didn't know how to fix it, you weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And, even bad cars today are way better than the best cars we had back in the 70s and 80s. So, um, my youngest son, for example, has a Honda Civic as his daily car. And, you know, by and large, he's never driven anywhere where it broke down on the way.
Yeah.
That was a couple of times a year occurrence when I was his age.
Easily. I do remember growing up and seeing all the cars on the side of the road that have caught fire, and it's pretty
Yeah.
rare now.
Yeah. So, so if you look at that side of it, that's one thing. I would think one thing that's pretty critical that keeps people from getting started racing that I hadn't considered. Again, when I started my business, my target was younger people who have less money, give them an opportunity to find a way to start racing. Um, Most of my clientele are not younger people. Most of my clientele are middle-aged. More on that in a minute. But, I have a couple of younger people who work for me who race cars out of the shop. They trade crew time for seat time.
Hmm.
And, one of them, Trenton, had a conversation with me just the other day about something that didn't occur to me, but it's really hard to own your own race car if you don't own your own home.
And a place to keep everything.
Yeah. So you say, okay, you live in an apartment complex, you can just go out and you can rent a storage building and you can put your car there. Well, storage buildings generally don't allow you to work on cars in the storage building.
Nope.
So now you're like, okay, well, then you can go out and rent a garage somewhere that lets you work on it. The cost just went up. And if you're living in an apartment, you're probably saving to buy a house. So why would you spend that extra money on storage? So, renting is a possibility to get younger people involved earlier than they might be able to afford to or logistically be able to. Because it's not just, okay, where's my car sit and where do I work on it? But where's the trailer sit? And oh, by the way, I have a tow vehicle, which, if I can only have one car, then my tow vehicle is also my commuter vehicle going to and from work, which means it's bigger and it, sucks more gas. So, it's really a financial difficulty for young people to get started in racing. And it's mainly because, things that were possible for us in our late 20s when we were younger are not possible for a lot of the younger generation today. Um, I had plenty of friends when I was younger who bought houses in their late 20s. Not many people in their late 20s can do that today.
No.
So
No. Even
I
if you're in a
certainly,
condo, you often don't have space, or, a lot of condos don't have garages, so you're in the parking lot and nobody in the condo association wants a race car, maybe under a tarp, maybe just out in the open in the parking lot for weeks on end. So it gets tricky.
yeah, I, uh, I was 34 when I started racing. I'd been autocrossing since I was 20, so 14 years of autocrossing, but I was 34 when I started racing. And I, finally got to a point financially, and like I said, I had a second job to help pay for it. That I'm going to go out and buy a car and build a race car. And I had the car that I bought towed to my apartment complex, and the next day the apartment complex manager knocked on the door and said, "You can't have that car here if it doesn't run and doesn't have a plate on it."
Right.
So I was lucky I was working for Dana Corporation and I'm talking about it at work. And my boss said, well, you can do it out of the garage in the in the shop at Dana Corporation. So, I built my first race car at work, which is a really unusual opportunity. But had that not happened, I would have had to sell that car and I would not have started racing at 34. It would have taken many more years before I had a chance.
Yeah, it's tricky, it's like that chicken and an egg thing they make jokes about for, since the beginning of time. So
Yeah.
it's a tough one. So when you're looking at racing, you've got to look at, some people make a budget. Like one of our friends, Con, is like a budget obsessed individual. He likes his Excel spreadsheets. He keeps track of everything. Then other people are, let's classify them as the ostrich, right? It is what it is and they don't want to know and they just spend the money that they need to spend the money, which is never a good plan, but they sometimes they do it. Um, the one thing that really tips the balance towards renting a car is all the associated startup costs. If there's any storage costs, if there's any mechanical issues, things like that. Those are the things that are often not even thought about because you think about the fun part, the being on track and the racing, but you don't think about all the other stuff that's almost or more than a full-time job to get you to the racetrack.
Yeah, I'm still amazed at the number of people who race who don't have a full set of spares. And what I mean by that is if I can only race 2 weekends a year and I go to the track and something breaks, there's still a substantial number of people who just load the car up on the trailer and go home. They basically lost one of their 2 weekends a year. And it's one of the things we've learned as we've rented more and more cars. We're getting close to our 100th client right now. So that's 100 different people who have sat in one of our race cars. But we have a a literal spreadsheet of spare parts that we take to the racetrack that allow us in almost every circumstance to fix a car. So once you've invested your weekend, you get to carry out your weekend. And I go even one step further. I check all of the local pick and pulls around the racetrack that I'm going to verify that there are parts available for the things that I don't carry around as spares.
Mm-hmm.
We had a client have an accident in the first practice session in Florida last year, which under normal circumstances would have ended his weekend. And we managed to get him out for his race because 80% of the parts that were necessary to fix the car were in the truck. And the two things that we didn't have to fix it, he was able to drive 15 miles away and pick them up from a junkyard.
Right.
Because I had checked ahead of time, that they had cars available.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, had they not had cars available, then I probably would have loaded those two items in the truck. So, how much is all of those spare parts worth? Geez, when you're talking about bumper reinforcements and hoods and things like that, you're basically saying, okay, now I got to buy a spare car because you can't afford to buy all of those things individually. So now you got a parts car.
Yep.
You
And the
didn't
space
have
for
room
it,
for your
blah, blah,
race car
blah.
and the trailer. Where's the parts car going to go? And are the neighbors going to complain?
And what do you
Right?
do when you take everything off of it? How do you get rid of it? Not that I've had that problem, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of startup costs that people don't consider. You got a race car, you got 4 tires on it for dry.
Mm-hmm.
There's still people who go to the racetrack without rain tires.
Yep.
And I've seen people load up and go home when the weekend turned into rain because they didn't have 4 extra wheels and 4 extra tires, which could be, anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500 in cost and value.
Yeah.
right?
Plus, I'm on the side that if I just bring 4 dries and 4 wets, that's still not enough because,
No.
there's, you could run over a piece of safety wire. You could just get a flat. You could deep beat it or whatever. And, you
And
know,
a lot of races don't have tire companies supporting the racetrack.
no, almost
So
none.
I've been at a racetrack before where I had a valve stem problem.
Hmm.
I can't get that fixed I can get it fixed probably on a Saturday if the track is near a metro area. I can
Yeah.
throw it in the tow vehicle and run out. But generally, I can't get it fixed on a Sunday. And racetracks in metro area are kind of rare
Yeah.
because they're noisy. So most of the racetracks are kind of remote. So yeah, you'll miss half your day. You'll miss your afternoon session if you have to run out and get a valve stem repaired.
Yep. I mean,
So yeah, you got to have extra tires.
um,
So you start to add all of that stuff together, and the costs, the investment to get started go up substantially. Which again, if you're renting, you don't have that, right?
no, no, it almost eliminates, and but when I say almost, it almost eliminates startup costs because I'm associating, personal safety items. You got to have your people will argue you got to have your Hans, you got to have your suit, you got to have your helmet, you got to have your gloves, you got to have your shoes, you got to have your socks, balaclava, ideally. Those aren't free either, but you were going to get them either way. So it's essentially as close to zero as possible to be safe, or all these associated costs and all this associated time and all this associated space and money. And it piles up. I mean, I look at what we started with. We started in one, and I'm prefacing this, I think most of our audience knows I'm a little ridiculous. So we started off with one hangar that's essentially one, two, three, four, five, 7 car spots. I ran out of room so fast that we had to get a second hangar. So now I have one hangar with 7 car spots, and that's 20-foot ceilings, and then another hangar with 6 car spots, again with 20-foot ceilings. And I'm running out of space again. And granted, our team is a little large, and I'm a little ridiculous, or as Vicky likes to say, I'm a lot ridiculous. But that's a different story. So, it doesn't get smaller.
Well, if you rent from a medium-sized rental company or larger, like we are, uh,
Hmm.
we're we're not we're not semi truck,
No.
7-car trailer kind of people, but we're also not like one car on an open trailer people either. So we're kind of in between in terms of our size. Most of us have a spare Hans, spare socks, spare gloves, spare racing
Yes.
suits, and
Yeah.
stuff like that in the trailer for those cases where people either forget it or earlier this year I had a husband and wife team who went through driver school and they weren't fully sure that, they were going to keep racing after driver school. So they only bought one set of everything.
Oh no.
So we provided the second set. With the exception of helmet, I think a helmet is a very personal item.
Yep.
How it fits and how you see out of it is critical for
Hmm.
safety.
Hmm.
So, I don't necessarily recommend people share helmets,
No.
right? You kind of need to, it's like a shoe,
Yep.
right? If if you're a size 9, you don't want to be racing in a size 7 shoe. By the same token, if you've got a smaller head, you do not want to put a larger helmet on because it's free and somebody loaned it to you for the weekend. If you have an accident, it's not safe.
Yeah. I think every time I hear about sharing stuff, and again, we're predominantly endurance racers. I just remember the one story that our friend Mental said when he was judging an endurance race. They had a college team and they were in a Texas race, and they saved money by everybody sharing the same race suit, everything in Texas in the summer. So you can imagine the second person thought that was a really bad idea. The third people
Yeah.
on thought it was just a terrible idea. And by the end of the weekend, they automatically upgraded to the no, this is a bad idea, fundamentally from the ground up, terrible idea.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Uh, not the mental picture anybody wants to think about, because if you've ever raced and you see what it looks like on a hot summer day, uh, sharing that with your friends is a level of intimacy that I am willing to say no, thank you, no, no, no.
Yep.
So so I guess it all comes down to, and I don't know that we want to get into costs, because it obviously depends on where you're racing and what type of racing it is. I know you have a ton of B spec cars, and you might even have more cars than that. And um, but when you look at it externally, I've heard people who check into it say they get a little bit of sticker shock with the number. But when you start looking at all that number takes in, it's really not that much different, if not less, than what you're going to spend without all the startup costs, without all the storage costs, without all the hassles of getting to and from the track and everything. If you look at the number, it's not that far off.
Yeah, so I'm not afraid to talk about generic numbers in this conversation
Okay.
because I've done a ton of not just research, but I'm the first rule of racing is never add up all the receipts.
No, no,
But
it's
I'm a
never a happy place at the end of that conversation.
no, but I'm a spreadsheet guy, and everything is in a spreadsheet. So
Hmm.
every roll of duct tape I bought, every tube of JB Weld, um, I know when I bought it and I know why I bought it.
Right.
So, let's just talk about the really difficult conversation of cost. So I'm going to start this with the details of what I said earlier, which is racing has not got more expensive over the past years. If I track entry fees at a racetrack, and I've done this now since the 80s when I started. Now, obviously, I have my own data for the races I went to, but since then, I've also gone back and pulled up data by looking at old registration forms to see what the costs were in other places. The biggest problem with entry fees is inflation goes up every year, but entry fees do not. And what I mean by that is, let's just say when I started racing, the entry fee for a regional race weekend in the late 80s was $150. It was $150 in 88, it was $150 in 89, it was $150 in 90, it was $150 in 91, and somewhere in 92, 93, they moved it to 165, and then it stayed for a while, and then they moved it to 175, and now it's $400. So if you started racing in one of those periods of time where they didn't change the entry fees for 5 years, your entry fee is cheaper than inflation because it's stair stepping. It's not going up at a linear manner.
Yeah, it's notchy.
Yep. So that's why people have this general idea that racing used to be cheaper. Yeah, some things were cheaper based on when you did it, right?
Hmm.
So the second part of racing that has an expense is the cost of driving to a racetrack. And whereas, gas is substantially more expensive, vehicles are way more expensive. But in general, we have more racetracks available more weekends now than we've ever had in the past. So you can race more without driving as far in general. So I'm going to also argue that travel costs have maintained a fairly similar linear uh, um, rate with inflation.
Right.
So those are two things that people always talk about. Then the third one that comes up is tires. And, my argument would be tire technology has gotten to the point now where tires are generally quicker, longer than they used to be. However, we have all different kinds of tires. So there are tires that are only good for a weekend.
Yep.
Whereas in B spec, we have tires that are, we have a spec tire from Goodyear, which is phenomenal. I ran Watkins Glen this weekend on the fifth weekend on a set of tires and won my races and set a track record. So that didn't happen in the 80s.
No.
I bought a set of tires. It was fast for that weekend. And if I wanted to go fast the next weekend, I had to buy another set of tires.
Even
So,
sometimes more than one set of tires per weekend.
yeah. Well, we have that today too. And, that's kind of where I'm at now. So we've talked about entry fees. We've talked about travel. We've talked about tire costs. Those are the three things people always jump on.
hmm
What we haven't talked about that has had a significant impact on the cost of racing is lap time.
True.
So in 1990, I built an ITC Ford Fiesta. In 1990, it cost me $5,000 to build that race car.
hmm
That included a roll cage, which was bolt in. That included all of the suspension details. That included, to the limit of the rules to modify it. Boring the engine, balancing the engine, the suspension, putting in a limited slip. And I
Yeah, all the
ran,
stuff we knew back then, right?
yeah. And, the car at the end of the day had 80 horsepower, weighed, 1,800 pounds or so. And at our local track, Waterford, my lap time was around a minute 20. And in 2019, I built a B-spec race car, which cost me about $10,000.
hmm
The car was more robust. It broke down less, and
Way,
it was
way
about a
safer.
second. It was way safer, and it was about a second a lap faster.
Yeah.
And if I look at inflation from 1980 to, let's just say 2020, 40 years, uh, sorry, 1990 to 2020, 30 years, $5,000 was about equal to $10,000. So for the same inflation number, I had a car that was more reliable,
hmm
safer, and slightly quicker. The difference is in 1990, building that Fiesta, the gap from me to the fastest car on the track was not that huge. Today, I can buy a minivan from the factory with 300 horsepower,
Easy. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And cars are just substantially quicker. And you look at a class like American sedan, which is used, American muscle cars like Mustangs and Camaros, and the front running guys are having to buy 6 tires a weekend to be competitive.
Yeah.
And
Easily.
the difference is the cars are big and heavy and they're blindingly fast. So if you're comparing that Camaro in 2020 to my Fiesta in 1990, you're not really comparing things that are like. You're comparing the cost is really a factor of how fast you want to go.
Yeah.
And how heavy the car is, not, a natural part of racing. So,
And the,
so
the car back then was probably, I'm not going to say it's the fastest car on track, but relatively fast back then. And now we consider a B-spec car, which is going faster on the same lap, slow.
oh yeah. Yeah. So, if I go to Daytona, the difference between a B-spec car and a GT1 car is 45%.
hmm
So if they have a minute and 40 lap time in a GT1 car, it's a 2 minute and 15 lap time in a B-spec car.
Right.
So if I go to a handling track like Waterford, the difference is about 20%. So the gap's about half. But it's huge. And that speed and the weight of the vehicles is what drives the cost. So, if you're looking at, what's the least expensive way for me to get involved in racing, first off, you want to buy a car that's regionally classed and not nationally classed.
Right.
Okay. So, an IT car, you can buy a decent IT car for $5,000. The problem you have is most parts of the country, when you take it to the track, you're going to be the only IT car in your class.
hmm
So So, there's a gap between a 15 grand B spec car today and a 5 grand improved touring car. Um, and then, you know, our variable cost for a weekend in a B spec car is about $500.
Yep.
So that's a grand for the tires. They last, let's say, 4 weekends, 3 weekends to be safe. Because the more skilled drivers get more weekends out of tires, we find with our renters, they don't get as much time on the tires
Yeah.
as the experienced drivers do. They overbrake and over corner. But so, you got $350 in a set of tires for a weekend, and then you got $50 in premium gasoline, because our most of our cars run um, catalytic converters, so you have to use premium unleaded for the performance cars. And then you've got cost of brake pads and rotors over the year. You've got the cost of oil changes. You add all of that stuff up, and you're about $500 of cost for a weekend for a B spec car. I would imagine there are classes where their weekend cost is probably 5 grand.
Easy. Yeah. 'Cause that
And
speed doesn't come for free.
nope. And then there's improved touring cars where you can probably do it for $250 a weekend. In other words, the improved touring cars are older, they're substantially lighter. My B-spec car weighs 2,675, so my tire wear is based on that. Remember, my Fiesta was around 1,800 pounds as an IT car. Put the same tires on the two cars, and the Fiesta is probably going to get twice as many weekends as the B-spec car is.
Mm-hmm.
So, your variable cost for a weekend is, 250 to 500. Spec Miata is probably pretty similar to the 500, if not more. The difference being, for a Spec Miata, you're not going to get $500 and have a nationally competitive car, right? You're going to be regionally competitive.
Yeah. And, again, to be fair, you're not allowed to say it, but I can. You're being very conservative on those costs because I know people who spend more than that at lower levels. And, it's kind of like when we lived in Hawaii, everybody used to say, oh, it's really expensive out there. I'm like, well, it can be as expensive as you're willing to make it. I mean, if you want a brand new pair of sticker tires every time you go on the track, that's, let's say there's 5 run groups. That's 20 tires minimum. And then we're talking, if you're that ridiculous, you might want to do that for practice too, right? And then, you're talking, you can spend racing's like, you can spend as much as you want. Nobody's going to stop you. Nobody.
The closest comparison to a race car that I'm going to use as an example is a boat.
Yeah, exactly.
So, everybody says a boat's a hole in the water you pour money into. Race cars are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
But just like racing, if you're not close to a racetrack, if you're not able to use the race car 4 times a year, it's probably better to have a friend with a boat than it is to have a boat.
It's always better to have a friend with a boat, Frank. We both know that. That's fine.
Yeah. So, for people who are just starting out, look, let's not sugarcoat it. There's 100 reasons to own a race car.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is if you like working on cars, then you don't need to rent. You need to own. Okay.
Yeah, if that's what scratches the itch. Yeah.
Yeah. The second one is if you want your race car to look exactly like you want your race car, you want it the color you want the seat in exactly the same position, you want the exact steering wheel you want, you're very specific about the way it feels and the way it looks, you need to own your own race car.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
If your racing schedule is based on, oh my God, it's Monday, I've got a free day on Friday, I'm going to go racing this weekend, you need to own a race car because it's really hard to rent a race car in 4 days' notice.
It's really hard to prep a race car in 4 days' notice, just for those listening at home. So don't blow that off.
I'm just saying, if you wake up on Monday and say, I'm going racing this weekend, generally
Yes,
you need to own your own race car to have a chance of making that happen,
for sure. Yep.
right?
Yep.
So there's tons of reasons to own a race car. Reasons not to own a race car. I don't have a garage. I don't have a tow vehicle.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if I like racing enough to make that big initial investment.
That's a big one that people often forget.
Yep.
Imagine you'd go through this, you start and you're like, yeah, that was fun, but it's not really fun. Then what do? You're going to lose a lot of money trying to liquidate what you've just bought. You're not getting that money back.
Yeah. Um, you you want to race all over the country, right? I can rent you a car, and I'm waiting for somebody to call me and ask for this, but I can give you a package deal for 2026 that includes Sebring, Lime Rock, Watkins Glen, Laguna Seca.
Hmm.
You could do those four racetracks in 1 year and not tow 1 mile because I have cars in the Northeast, in the Southeast, and in California.
Yeah.
So
That's quite a bucket if you're going to make a bucket list. Those are on that list.
yeah, so that's another reason why you would want to rent a race car. Um, One that people don't want to talk about. Let's say you decide I love Mazda RX-7s
Hmm.
and I want to race a Mazda RX-7. So I go out and I buy a Mazda RX-7 and I build it to the IT7 class that currently is regionally allowed in most of the country, which means I'm going to race against other Mazda RX-7s that are built similar to mine in terms of rules. Great. I find a car that I think is phenomenal base for 5 grand. I buy it, I invest 5 grand in it. I have the nicest Mazda RX-7 in IT7 in the country, and I've spent 10 grand on it. Awesome. 2027 rolls around, and the club that you're racing with says, you know what? There aren't enough Mazda RX-7s racing anymore. We're going to shut down the IT7 class. That
Yep.
car is not worth anywhere near the 10 grand you have in it.
Nope.
In fact, you're not going to be able to get the 5 grand that you bought it for in the first place, most likely. So you're at the you know the sanctioning body, the club, the for-profit organization that runs your car can change the value of your car by a rule change. This is another reason renting may be a big advantage over owning, because if they kill B-spec next year, you don't lose money, I do,
Right.
because all my cars are worth less. Or if next year, this year you're renting a B-spec Mini Cooper from me because the way the rules are set up, the Mini is a good car to have. And next year they add 100 pounds to the Mini and they take 100 pounds off the Mazda. Next year you can rent a Mazda from Offline Racing, and you're like always in the competitive car.
Hmm. And you may
Not
find out
without
your
you.
driving fits a different car.
Yeah. So there are people owning a car is right for. There are people who renting a car is right for. You just got to ask yourself those questions, which ones work. And by the way, there's three types of rental companies in the country. There are large companies that this is all they do. Um, Alliance Autosport in Ohio is a great one we recommend all the time. They have Spec Miata, they have TA2, they have Formula cars, they got a huge shop, Spec Racer Ford, and they'll take care of you and they'll travel to many of the racetracks in the country. Of course, you pay more. Like you hire them to race at Sebring, you're going to have to pay them to tow your car from Ohio to Sebring.
Right.
So, uh, you know, your costs to rent a car from them And again, I don't know their exact numbers, so I'm going to use some generic numbers, but most of those companies are in the 3 to 4 grand entry level range, and they go up from there,
Hmm.
depending on if you want to have test days or whatever else.
Basically, for the weekend, it's that
Yes.
much. Yes.
Yep. And then, of course, you got to pay for the transportation on top of that rental rate.
Hmm.
Um, then you have a guy who's got a spec Miata who can't really afford to go racing. So he races his spec Miata twice a year, and he rents his only car to you 2 weekends a year. He might rent it to you for $1,000 a weekend because that's $1,000 in his pocket he didn't have otherwise, and it helps cover his cost of racing. He's not a business, he's
Nope.
just a guy renting a car.
Right.
There are those options all over the country as well, but very specific tracks and very specific weekends. For example, he's probably going to drive his car on the weekend when 40 cars show up in its class. He's not going to let you rent it. He's going to let you rent it on a weekend where only 2 cars show up, right?
Hmm.
Or like I started in the 80s, I had a race car, and as I continued to improve the race car, I put a new suspension on it. I got nicer wheels. I got better tires. I had enough parts left over to build a second car. So when I started renting in 1991, it's the first time I rented anybody a race car. I had 2 race cars, and the really good car I drove, and the less good car with the older parts on it, I would rent at a discount to people. And you might be able to find that situation for 1,500 or 2 grand. If you look around the country, there's people who have 2 cars and they'll rent one of them to you,
Hmm.
and that's an option. Our company is kind of in between. So we're not $1,500 and we're not $4,000. We're in between that. So we're generally around $2,500 a weekend.
Right.
Again, you still have to pay to transport the car to and from the track. So those are some general numbers. When people come to us and they say, you know what, I want to rent the July Watkins Glen race next year and they want to sign a contract today, I'll give a huge discount for that because it helps me plan my travel. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to rent 3 weekends next year, um, I'll give a discount for that. And then I also typically between Black Friday and middle of December, I offer some specials. Last year, I offered 3 race weekends at majors, Mid-Ohio, Grattan, and Gingerman, and the runoffs at Road America, package price for 15 grand.
Wow.
And, that means you can go run at the national championship race in a competitive car with no out of pocket, of course, unless you wreck it or damage it. No out of pocket, no towing for the same price it would cost you to buy a car.
And that's basically, plus or minus, that's a full season for almost everybody.
Yeah. So, that's 4 weekends. And all the towing, all the fuel, all the tires, all the brakes, all the maintenance, all the assurances that the car is good. We have 21 race cars for rent, which means, you know, with our spares, you go out on a Saturday and have a mechanical or an accident, odds are you'll still go out Saturday afternoon or Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make it through the weekend. Um, we have been known to run back to the shop and pick up a spare car if we needed to. Sometimes when we have room on the trailer, we have a spare car at the track already.
Right.
So, these are all things that aren't going to happen if you were to own your own car. Like to give an example, to do the same thing with your own car, 3 majors and the runoffs, you are probably looking at 5 grand out of pocket in terms of towing
Easy,
and
especially if you're nationwide like that.
yeah, oil changes and everything else. So it, it it is another option, another way for people to get involved in racing.
Yeah. And it's also great when you can let's just pretend we're going to use ourselves as an example. We live in the Northeast. One of our bucket list tracks is Thunder Hill. Getting one of our cars to Thunder Hill is expensive. It's probably easily more than a week at least. Just tow out, tow back, and race there. And who knows what condition you're in to race there after towing across the country. We're probably closer to 2 weeks to do it the right way.
So we are at Thunderhill on October 25th and 26th, and we have two cars available.
Exactly.
And the rental from us is less than it would cost you to tow the car to and from Thunderhill.
100%. And we have cars. I mean, people who listen to the podcast know we probably have too many cars. But if we want to go do, let's say the 25, which doesn't exist anymore, hopefully it comes back. This would be a way for us to do it because, it's hard to get, because not only if you're going to go out there, you got to bring all your spares, you got to bring all your tools, you got to bring all your supplies, it gets hard to do it in one trailer. And it's no fun driving cross country with a trailer, and it's really no fun driving all the way back. So, this is good for people who have, even if you own your own car, sometimes this is the make sense button, not the oh my God button. So let's think about it.
Yep.
Did we miss anything, Frank? Did we cover it pretty good? Or, because obviously we're going to have a part 3, but, anything that comes to note right now?
I don't think I missed anything, but I think we talked about too many different subjects. So maybe I can summarize real
Okay.
quick
That'd be great.
end things. Racing isn't cheap. It's never been cheap. At the same time, you have never had more of an option on how to go racing and more reasonable options on how to go racing. Because when I started, rentals were virtually non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's rentals all over the country in all different kinds of classes.
Yeah.
When I started, an endurance race was a rarity, and you couldn't find a seat in an endurance car if you had a pocket full of money. Now, with all of the different endurance series, that's another option on how you can get started in racing. We didn't talk about it during the podcast, but some of the endurance series don't require you to have a competition license. I would caution one thing that we haven't talked about that I want to make sure people think about. What happens if you get hurt at a racetrack? So, only one club in the country has a really great insurance policy that, let's say you're walking through the pits and you step in a pothole and you break an ankle. Uh, you know, some sanctioning bodies have insurance that cover you for that. Most of them do not.
Mm-hmm.
By the same token, if I run off the track and hit a guardrail, some sanctioning bodies will send me a bill for repairing the guardrail.
It's not a small bill either.
Right? So, I'm not going to get into a value conversation about which sanctioning bodies are best and which ones aren't, because if you live, again, we back to the zip code thing, if you live in certain parts of the country, you only have a couple of choices,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yep.
not everybody races everywhere enough to make people happy. So racing isn't cheap. It's really not getting more expensive, though. What is getting more expensive is driving fast is expensive, heavy cars. Rentals are a way to mitigate the cost. Rentals are a way to experiment before you make the final investment. Rentals are a way to be flexible. And, finally, there's going to be a certain percentage of people who listen to this and who are like, even a $500 a weekend entry fee is outside of any kind of money that I can afford. The majority of us who race cars would kill to have people come over to our house and help us work on our race cars, and would kill to have people come to the track and help us. And by and large, the one thing that doesn't get talked about enough is if you love racing and you cannot financially afford to race, go to a racetrack when they're having a race, walk around, talk to people, volunteer with the club that or the organization that's having the event, flag a corner, um, work grid, go help them in timing and scoring, do something like this to volunteer to help the event run. And the reason for that is all of the best deals in racing happen word of mouth at the racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
If you see a car for sale online, that means the guy who owned that car has tried to sell it for a period of time. His friends have all turned it down.
Yep.
All the people at the racetrack who are not friends but acquaintances have turned it down. And he's posting it online as his last resort to sell it. The best deals get sold verbally at a racetrack that never were posted anywhere for sale.
Yep. Indeed.
So going to a racetrack is the biggest thing you can do to minimize your cost of racing, because you're going to meet a lot of people and maybe you get lucky. I have 5 people who work on my race cars at my shop and who've gone to driver school in exchange for the amount of work that they've done on the race cars versus having to spend any money out of pocket.
Right. So, Frank, if anybody wants to rent a nationally competitive B-Spec Mini, I know a guy, you know a guy. How would they get in contact with that guy?
Our website is www.grasspaddock, GRASSPADDOCK.com. Just a quick comment about where the name came from. If you go to a racetrack to race, the people with money tend to be in the garages. They rent garages for their cars because it's nice and convenient. And then the people with a little bit of money tend to be paddocked in the flat paved areas, which are often reserved. And then the rest of us end up paddocking somewhere in the grass. So um, we kind of adopted that as our mantra and atmosphere. We tend to be a grass paddock attitude,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily our location,
Right.
but we're rather inclusive. Um, we scholarship minorities and women who want to get started racing on a fairly regular basis, and we help people who can't afford to get racing find a way to get into the club and the activity. So Grass Paddock is our name because that's kind of the atmosphere and attitude of where we are on a racetrack weekend.
Yep, indeed. So reach out to Frank if this sounds like interesting fun to you, and you may see us next to you. Who knows? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Always fun. We won't say goodbye. We'll just say we'll see you on our third lap coming soon ish. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.